Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Susie Church Brown. I am here talking with three amazing women. With me is Hillary.
Hillary Midkiff.
Morgan is joining us as well.
Good evening, good morning, good day.
Good, yes, whatever time it is you're listening. And Lisa is with us.
Hey, everybody. Good to be back together.
It is. It's been, I should say we have had many conversations. They just weren't shareable. They were personal and et cetera, et cetera.
Or we forgot to hit record.
But we are super excited to come today and talk with you about something important.
Marriage.
I think Lisa's gonna, there you go. Marriage.
For those Princess Bride fans out there, we are gathered here today to celebrate love, true love.
I think it's actually an anniversary of Princess Bride, right? Not like right around now.
I gotta be honest, I thought you were quoting Spaceballs.
Hillary.
No, Princess Bride, the true love story.
Bride. Oh, I love
There was
the
a
Princess
marriage
Bride.
scene in Spaceballs that I thought it's what everyone. It could literally be the same guy in Spaceballs too.
So
That's
one of
awesome.
the things that I think kind of laces through most situations in foreign service is some form of a partnership or relationship with a significant other, be that trying to remember what MOH stands for.
Member of household.
Thank you, member of household, or a marital partner of whatever gender. So we are just going to be talking about those kinds of relationships, not necessarily relationships with your kids, although obviously your kids impact your partnership or your marriage quite a bit. I think all of us were, maybe not you, Hillary, but all of us were married before we started this adventure, right? Just think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So the relationship sort of predates the situation of being in the foreign service. Still thinking about it.
No, it does, but we met in Mexico, then moved to Switzerland, then moved to Thailand, and none of that was in the foreign service, but it was foreign service adjacent.
Which is very similar.
It was all uprooting and all chaos and all, gosh, we should probably not get divorced, but God, I really want to.
Well, and that really foreshadows into my first question. So moves and like actually physically relocating to a new house is like one of the top 10 stressors. Layered onto that this is an international move, and you are all moving into a new job. At least one of you for sure is moving into a new job, because that's what foreign service does. But then hopefully you as the trailing spouse is also moving into a new job. You have new schools, so the kids are stressed. You have the whole like, where's the grocery store? How do I buy bread? Et cetera, et cetera. Moving and this sort of situation is one of the top 10 stressors. Let's just say that. Right along with like being mauled by a bear. So just to like compare something that's equally as traumatic. So how many moves have you guys made with your partner?
Oh, this would be fun.
I don't know, but can I just
to new countries?
Yeah.
While Hillary and all of you are counting, because I'm not even going to try, and Susie, I know you probably have more than possibly all of us combined. I would not still be together with my spouse and partner if I had not heard this sage advice before our first move. Some woman that I met who had been in the foreign service with her husband and family for 25 plus years said that she and her husband have a rule that they cannot get divorced 6 months before a move or 6 months after a move. And I kind of chuckled. And then I told my husband about that. And then we have lived by that. And that is, I mean, I might be sounding dramatic, but I don't think I'm actually being dramatic at all, of saying that is like the thing that has saved us from getting divorced repeatedly. It's crazy stressful before and after.
Yeah, 6 months before and after, like that generally like captures most of the discussions, air quotes, of course, before, planning, scheduling, like shipments, packing it out, etc. And then we're starting the whole like divest yourself of stuff that you don't need, except some of us don't agree that we don't need it, and others of us are convinced that we don't need it. So hence the discussions, air quotes. So this is our 8th assignment, about to be our 9th assignment. One of which we ended up having to do apart, but we had to move 3 times in that apart time, so that wasn't international, so that doesn't count. So that's how many we've done.
5.
That's it, Hillary. 5
Morgan?
moves. Like, does each leg count?
I'm not counting, I'm just counting like from
Locations.
point A to like, yes, because yeah, the in-between part would be like too big of a number.
So if you count like each place, like, so I got married and then we moved immediately to Washington, D.C. before the Foreign Service. And then we moved domestically twice before joining the Foreign Service. But anyway, so if you count each time we moved from one place to another, it's 10. But I think there's only like, well, I don't know. Anyway, but it's a lot. I will say, and we talked about this, I think, and I can't remember if it was in our recording or not, when I think our last aired podcast, I was really whinging a lot. I'm not sure I've come to a different place, so I might also be doing that in this podcast for everybody. This is Morgan. So that if later you're like, who's the whiny one? It's Morgan. Anyway, I think I'm not getting better at it. So I do think maybe that you might get worse at moving. I do think you are, not everybody, right? But I guess I will say I have gotten better at tolerating that my relationship struggles in that time, right? Like early on, I might have been less forgiving of myself for being impatient or like not liking it. Now I'm like, I hate moving and I'm okay with that. And I recognize it's taking a toll on this relationship, but also the relationship is perhaps more, I'm sick of using the word resilient, but it is more resilient and like more, like, I feel like it's safe to have to be upset or to like be angry, and it's fine, and it's not going to be like, and because I'm angry today we're going to get divorced tomorrow, right? It's like, this is just a part of a relationship, especially given all these stressors and especially given like how we're doing this together. And I'm hopefully, I guess, more forgiving of my spouse if and when he's also like perhaps inexplicably extra angry. I can just be like, that's not about me, it's okay. Let that go. So it was a long way to say 10.
I think there's so much wisdom in what you shared, though, and I think that is really important. And I've been married twice. My first husband passed away, and I thought after that I analyzed our relationship and I identified all the dysfunctions, and then I read all the books and went to counseling and thought I had it all figured out going into my second marriage, and then was blindsided by like very similar issues that came up again. And I say that just to be like, long-term intimate relationships have challenges, and yeah, they can be really difficult. And I think it's people in my life who have shared their own difficulties that from the outside I looked at and was like, oh my gosh, those are like the ideal couple and they must be always happy and never argue. Having heard stories from those couples of we've had some very difficult times and we have thought multiple times like we're done, we're over it. Here's the reasons why we are still together and we've worked through it and here's how. That's been really comforting for me that when we are in those really difficult times, I don't like in my mind I often feel like I'm alone, particularly in the foreign service world because it can be very difficult to find safe spaces to talk about our spouses because lots of people know them and they know them in professional context and they like see them in all their glory and then we're like just ready
There's
to like
warts too,
come
just so you know.
Yeah,
a
you're like,
lot
they don't
and
ever
big
put
ones.
dishes in the dishwasher.
Take that, cable of the week.
But there is that fishbowl effect is like super toxic sometimes.
Yes.
And it is hard to find a way to find people to connect with where you can be like, oh my, oh, you would not believe what just happened because, you know, the person that you're talking to is like,
Their boss.
or, you know, your spouse is their boss, which is even more uncomfortable.
Mhm.
It is a very challenging situation when you are overseas. I feel like that that's actually one of my questions. How do you feel like the isolation of your nuclear family and like you as like sort of an island unto yourselves within that like bubble, that embassy bubble? How do you think that impacts, well, your relationship with your partner slash spouse? And like how do you keep that separate from like all of the relationships that are going on in the bubble, in the embassy, in the very, very, very I don't want to say intrusive community, but kind of.
But
Incestuous.
nosy and intrusive.
Well, how do you think that impacts your relationship?
I mean, I think in those early days, like you're each other's lifeline, but it's annoying. Like you're also trying to make friends, you're also trying to meet people. And I always felt Juan and I are both two, even though I test as an introvert, two very extroverted people who like to go out and meet people and make friends. And so if one of us isn't doing that, we become very clingy to the other one. And we are never in sync with that. We're not both out making friends at the same time or both at home, like meeting each other at the same time. It is always one or the other. And so that dynamic always plays out quite a bit in like the first year. And I think it can be, at least in our relationship, that's been a source or rather a pain point for annoyance, which then also escalates into arguing and bickering and all of this. But it's us trying to stretch that bubble, right? So we're not just this capsule. So we're not just fighting with each other and stressing each other out in an already stressful situation, but trying to expand that bubble sometimes causes us quite a bit of grief. One person will generally have a job outside the house and the other might have a job and at home, and that has that dynamic as well. Someone's getting released during the day and the other person comes home and one person wants to chill and the other person's like, oh my god, a human, real human, not an AI bot. Oh my gosh, I have questions. What's it like outside? What's the weather? Oh my god, did you take a toke?
You're an adult and you're gonna have a rational conversation with me.
Take this newborn.
Lisa, Morgan, thoughts on the nuclear family, making that whole thing like not implode?
Morgan, do you have a thought?
Yeah, but you go.
I know you do. Well, I'll just share this. I think, you know, we've talked how over the past, I don't know, 50 plus years, the expectations of marital partners has changed where like generations ago, it was like, well, yep, you get married to somebody, you have kids. There's not this expectation of friendship and love and support and everything. And now relationships like marriage partners are supposedly going to fulfill all of our greatest needs and deepest desires and it is first of all a little bit unrealistic, but then when you add in moving together you really strip away oftentimes like the consistent community that can fill in the gaps for us and for our emotional needs and social needs that might be very relevantly filled by other people in our lives. And the other thing that I have seen, and I kind of passed through this phase myself, and I really resisted it because community is really important to me. But after a couple of moves, I was emotionally exhausted from meeting people and then saying goodbye. And I was just like, I don't need to make any friends at this next post. I've experienced people like that. It's like I have my family. I don't need to be friends with anybody. And maybe that works for some people. I know it doesn't work for me, and I had to really push myself through that to be like, no, actually, like my spouse isn't enough. And yes, it's going to be painful to meet people that I love and then say goodbye way too soon. And I have to push myself to do that because I know that I'm going to just like melt away as a human if I don't have those connections.
Here, yay,
Um,
here, yay, here.
Yes, here. I agree. It's hard. I think I'm right there currently where I'm like, I'll just be fine not having any friends because I can talk to these three ladies once a month. And it's good, but I probably do
Twice
need
this
some
month.
other people. I know. I mean, now I really don't have to make friends till March. Um,
It's a short month too.
but it's basically over. A couple of things. One, on Lisa's point of like we used to have this community and now we expect our spouse to fill all these different roles. And this is conversation adjacent, which is that somebody just told me that in China, men have always said that they need three women. You have one for love, that's your wife, one for romance, and one for sex. And so I guess that's like a
What?
wife. I know. I was like, that's too many, but I guess bear with me here because you have. And then I was like, what about women? And they're like, yeah, this isn't involved. Like, do women get three men? But anyway, or three partners of the sex you prefer. But anyway, love, romance, and sex, which I was like, that's an interesting split because it's like you have like this, I guess in this case, like one that is there and sort of the person that is the stability, right? Like this partner and they'll be there no matter what, right? And that's sort of, I guess, ideally what people get in a marriage, right? That you're like, we're going to have highs and lows, but we're committed, right? And I think that's the long-term goal, but we now, I guess, in a more evolved modern society, rather than being like, I'll just have three different people because I can't maintain this with one, but like that you do want like your life to be interesting and maybe have romance and then like, I mean, this isn't like a sex podcast, but also sex, right? So it's like you have these different parts of your life, but at different moves and different times, like all of these aspects of ourselves, and it's not nearly so simple as just these three, right? Like that you have all these things you need from your partner and you need them or expect yourself to be able to fulfill those all the time, even though we are constantly changing all of our external environment factors, right? And like the community Lisa references, right, like might be a big part of what allows you to have a better relationship with your partner, and you don't realize until that community's gone that that is actually detrimental also to your relationship with your partner. And the like maybe that's part of what's hard is you're like, oh, okay, actually I do need to make more friends so that I can like be in like, what word am I looking for, enriched and fulfilled in a different way that allows me to be able to give even more back to my partner and my family because I have these other emotional inputs from other people near me. And some of that of course can be done virtually with friends and people from afar, but like there is an element to people in your life in real life that I think is important to helping your more intimate relationships, be that your partner or your family or whatever. To circle all the way back, Susie, to your question of like, what about this intrusive bubble that you love hate of the mission, right? Whoever it is, that I think I do find it's getting like, I don't know, I typically didn't work with my spouse at embassies or consulates because I don't seem to fit in very great. But I think I have found it, I guess, even more the more senior Phil gets, that it's like harder for me to be authentic at work because of what you're saying, Susie. Like that, and I think it's even harder if your spouse is in management, right? Because they like her everybody or GSO or those kinds of things because they are by the nature of their job in everybody's life somehow. And so it becomes very hard not to be seen as only that person and their job, even if like socially you'd like to just hang out. Then they're like, well, what about this? Or my sink's broken, and you're just like, okay, well, I'm a human at the pool. Like, I don't need to fix your sink or tell my spouse to fix your sink right now,
Yeah.
right? And I think that would take a toll on the relationship, right? Because I find it invasive. And I'm like, I'm not just this person's spouse, right?
Mhm.
Like, I am a human. And I don't know, it's been weird. Like I got kind of over that as an EFM. I was like, oh, I've managed EFM. And now in this stage, I'm like back to the beginning feeling of like, do I not have an identity that is separate? And anyway, I found that is actually not great for my marriage. Once again. So just all of you that are like in that middle phase, if anybody's listening and is like, EFMs are okay. Just a heads up, it might come back and blindside you later. Again.
But your next post waiting for you upon arrival.
You might think that you've passed it and you're at peace with EFMdom, and then maybe later it will rear its ugly head in a way you hadn't anticipated.
But
Sorry,
there
whiny one
is-
again. This is Morgan.
So just enjoy the peace while it lasts because it's likely to be fleeting.
It's the same thing with parenting. You just enjoy each phase as you go through it, and then whether or not you're annoyed with it. But there's a lot of truth in that like the higher your direct hire spouse goes, and I imagine this is even more like complicated with tandem couples, but like the higher up you go, it actually is the more isolated you are again. Like first you're like the JO, and the only people that are the same age as you is like the Marines at post, who are all lovely people. Please don't get me wrong, but they have a different choice of activities typically than than maybe more settled and liver conscious individuals might be. And then as you kind of go through, you start like doing things like book clubs and hanging out and just like talking to one another instead of just drinking. And then you start getting up to where you are the more senior you are, it is quite isolating, because then you're either the boss of everyone or you're hit up about your sink or whatnot. So it is like it is a very complicated balance. And then so that bubble either becomes super restrictive, or you just start like avoiding it altogether, and then looking for social interactions outside. But then that is, depending on your country and community, also kind of complicated.
I wanted
Can
to
we toss-
ask. Oh, go.
No,
Lisa
you
and I are
Morgan.
trying to take over.
I went first last time. I'm passing it to you.
I want to ask Hillary, because I do think I've never been actually like once I was like, I don't know if that's true actually. This might have something to do with a lot of my built-in resentment that's surging right now, which is like that it's never been my career that's been the lead in my relationship. And I don't think at this stage it probably ever will be. And so I'm trying to like come to peace. Is that the phrase? I can't even say it. I'm trying to be at peace with it and be like, that doesn't mean I don't have value or that I haven't accomplished something. But I do want to ask Hillary, who I know you and Juan have taken turns sort of being like, oh, it's me, it's you. And that does seem like also kind of fraught, because then you have to totally shift from like, I go and then make everything work out once I'm there, versus like right now I'm going to just pursue, like I'm now the lead. And I don't know, it sounds like it seems like to me that could have challenges that we haven't addressed yet. Are there anything that you would say is like harder or easier about that, or that makes it a different situation in your marriage?
Yeah, I mean, as evolved as one is, he is still a Colombian man from Latin America who has preconceived notions about the role of men in the world. And but that said, he was incredibly supportive about this move. And I saw it on he said, "I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad," and I laughed out loud. And I was like, "That's adorable. That's the cutest thing." And I give it about a week and a half. Like, neither of us is just going to sit still. It's a lot of the character traits Juan and I share really come up a lot when it comes to jobs and careers. And I think him taking kind of a backseat this time, it was interesting because yeah, usually I'm following him, and that what has happened perpetually in our relationship is I will go where he's going, and then I will make an amazing career, and then his job will kind of fall off, or he'll do something else, and then my career will skyrocket, and then we'll move to the next place for him because he's got an opportunity, and same thing again. Then I find something. So this was the first time I kind of took the lead, and it was jarring because it wasn't, let's just move over here. It's let's move around to the world around the world during COVID to a country neither of us has ever been to before. And so I felt an extreme amount of pressure anytime Juan was like, "Oh, the faucet's dripping." I'm like, "I'm sorry, I brought you to Sri Lanka. I'm so sorry. It's my fault. I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry." And we would have a lot of those arguments where I was taking on what was probably an undue burden of responsibility, which he was not putting on me. It was my perceived level of that. And I was right. Juan was super happy being a stay-at-home dad for about a month, and then he had an amazing job that took off faster than mine. And so he took that role, and then we were both working 80-hour weeks, which was fun. And no one was
Perfect.
staying at home with the child.
She's very self-involved.
It was COVID, so we were all kind of home with the child. But anyway, I think it took him a while to get to a good place with that, and it did lead to different kinds of bickering among us. But I have to say, most of it was probably self-inflicted. And I don't know how many of your spouses probably feel that like innate responsibility, like that it's our fault. We brought you to this godforsaken country where the traffic is horrible and like people are spitting on the ground. There's cockroaches in our house, and this is all my fault. This is my fault. This is my fault. And it's not. We signed up to do this together. We said we would be supportive, and we said we would give this a go. And it kind of goes back to what Lisa said. Juan and I have a similar thing, which is don't get divorced 6 months before or after. It's like no big life decisions for the first 6 months in a new country. And we've stuck to that, and it has also saved our relationship several times. And the other thing that has saved it is wherever we land, we get a therapist immediately. Even if we're in a good place and we don't need it, we find a therapist, and we kind of go religiously, at least for those first 6 months, to make sure we're airing out all of the grievances and they're not building up and they're not bottling up. And both people have to be committed to doing that. Not every time together. Sometimes we go at separate times or whatever, but it's been something that's really worked through those stressful periods. And right now, we're both about to be let go from USAID. And we talked at lunch today. We're like, why don't we just go ahead and call a therapist and start just getting ahead of it all and just getting it all out there on the table? Because I don't even know what's upsetting us right now. I don't know. It's probably just the uncertainty of the whole situation, but we are not communicating well, understatement of the year. And spewing that at someone else and letting them sort it out and talk through it for us really seems to be helpful.
That leads me to my next question, which I think you probably have another answer, but you can play that card if you want to. So my question is, what do you do to invest in your relationship with your spouse?
So
I almost just made a dirty hand gesture. And that maybe as well. Where is my head tonight? I'm so sorry, and I'm happy this isn't being recorded.
Hillary is all three of those women.
All rolled in one package. With fancy underwear.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's different things that come to mind. If I piggyback off of the going to a therapist or a counselor, that has certainly been part of John and I's journey. And I also find that this can be challenging in the foreign service because if in most work situations, they're not asking you to talk about, are you in therapy on the side or in marriage counseling? And in our world, we have people asking about those things, and there's, requirements of reporting these things, which I know makes people more hesitant. And this has been something my first husband refused to go to therapy with me. And that was something like from the very beginning with John, probably like on our first date, I probably was like, if this is going to work, you're going to have to be willing to go to therapy because like, um, and, and he has, and I also have seen the stress, especially early on, where he was worried, will this impact my career? Will someone think less of me? And my response early on was, well, I'm more important than your job. So if this means you lose your job because you're in therapy with me, like, I don't care. Like, so I wasn't the most compassionate, but I think it is really important to recognize the challenging aspect of bringing in sometimes that third party professional in our relationships in this particular setting. And I think that it also can be so incredibly helpful. I remember at one time feeling like I was, I felt like I was communicating well and directly. And it was like John could not understand what I was saying. And I remember saying to the therapist, I'm like, I'm really hoping you can be a translator because I feel like I'm saying everything clearly as I know how. And he's not comprehending. So could you please like translate between us? And it sometimes feels like that. And it can be really helpful to have somebody objective and external to the relationship to be some sort of translator.
Good point. Morgan, what about you? And nothing is a totally fair answer.
Well, I want to say I'm investing in my relationship, but I'm sure something will come to me. No, I have found that I like when Phil and I are alone hanging out or we're like go on a date or something, I'm like, I really like this guy and like so funny and we get along and everything's great. And then like when we're home and freaking Zoom wants me to raise my hand every time I move it. I'm just gonna stuff it down. Anyway, whenever we're home, then I'm like, God, like I'm super mad. And so I've been trying to be a little bit objective about like, okay, I need to like merge those two, right? Because we can't just exist on dates where everything's great. But when I'm home and like just getting frustrated about something that, it's not, I don't know, like most of the things, right? It's not like the end of the world. It's not like I'm like, I'm going to end it because there's one more dish you didn't put in the dishwasher, right? But I'm like annoyed by those things. And so it's like the difference between like, okay, so I remind myself and him, I'm sure that he has the same things where like, why is she like this, right? Like, except I'm obviously better. Just kidding. Sorry. Anyway, not nearly as annoying as he is, objectively. But that it helps to see each other right in these different moments, right? And I think it actually like even if you do happen to work at the same place, right? Like it helps even to see your spouse then working and be like, oh, they're like look at how other people see them. right? And like the different, I don't know, I would say maybe it doesn't sound like I'm investing in it, but like to invest the time and effort into seeing what my spouse is like, and to try to appreciate things that when I'm frustrated about like dumb domestic things, that like I can appreciate the other aspects and be like, we can resolve these things because they're not as huge as like, is this person committed to our relationship and our family? Yes, but like the dishes, no. And is that going to be a deal breaker or not? Probably not.
Right.
What do you do,
Mm.
Susie?
Putting things into perspective. I mean, yeah, it is interesting to be at work with my spouse because he has a very different relationship with his colleagues and the people that he supervises and et cetera, et cetera. But I find that what works best for us is like, yeah, we'll go on date night or whatever, and then
Sometimes they crash our date.
we crash their date.
Happened once.
But what really works is to not think about work and not talk about like the stuff that has been going on during the day and not talk about the kids and just be like reconnecting on the things that we were really interested in and really meshing on before, and like a lot of different new interests, etc., that we have now. Like a lot of the things that I do that I'm really interested in and I find a lot of energy in, he doesn't necessarily know about. And so just to find ways to talk to him about it in a non-lectury sort of voice, because I was told that I tend to preach, so I try not to do that. And so just like, having these conversations where they're like actually conversations rather than like just monologuing or whatever, but just
Or
connect,
debates to win.
or debates to win. I'm not especially
That's one of our
competitive
favorite
that way.
things.
Debating. I always figure like, okay, whatever, like you think that, I don't think that, so that doesn't mean you win. And he's super knowledgeable about a lot of things that I am not necessarily knowledgeable about, so it's just really interesting to talk about these sorts of things. We also do all of our we do a lot of morning workouts together, and so that's when we get to like just connect, and while we're doing something, there aren't screens and other distractions going on, although arguably like we are working out together, so there's that inherent distraction, but it's been something that it's just been consistent throughout our entire marriage, and it's been super fun to keep that evolving as we change our different like physical interests and such. So that's what we do.
I think that's really cool. And I think activities together are super helpful for John and I. And it is sort of like there's focus on something else, and it doesn't just have to be like this intense, conversation, just like doing things together. And it can sometimes remind me of like, oh, I remember why I like you. And
Yeah, exactly.
the other thing that came up, Morgan, when you were talking a number of years ago, I learned about, I think it's called internal family systems, where they talk about all these different parts of us as humans, and learning the language. I remember saying this to John. I'm like, okay, there is a part of me that is very angry with you right now, rather than saying like, I'm so angry at you, right? It's not all of me, because there's a part of me that loves you. There's a part of me that's angry. There's a part of me that's frustrated. And so in this theory, like there's all these different parts of us and they all make us up. And it actually was quite helpful to use that language of like, yeah, a part of me right now would like to never ever see you again. But another part of me really loves you and wants to figure this out. And yeah, it's just helpful to kind of put all
That's
the
good.
different
I'm
complicated
gonna use
pieces
that.
together.
Do you have
Part of
another
me
thing?
thinks you're the dumbest smart person I've ever met.
I own that thought. Yes.
I don't even remember what the question was.
the one thing you, how do you invest in your relationship?
Oh, yeah. Tens of thousands of dollars therapy. I'm not joking about that figure. I actually really try to destigmatize it in the embassy too. Like I talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
They brought in my therapist for the
Nice.
group USA therapy session on,
Mm.
oh, they're gonna fire us all. And I just walked up to her in the middle of everyone in the room. I was like, "That's Charlie, she's my therapist. She's mine."
Aw.
Because I think it's something that a lot of people are either ashamed to talk about, don't know how to engage, don't know how to set it up, have all these different mixed emotions around, especially men. But I think it's just one of those things that pays off so quickly. And the tools they give you, especially if you come from families like mine that didn't know how to communicate with each other. And so I was exposed to really poor levels of parental communication. And so I think it's fine to scream fight with people and they just make up at the end of the day and everything's fine until you get divorced, right? Like that's how it works. So I really had to relearn a lot of communication styles, and that's been very, very helpful for me. I do not like when Juan quotes the therapist at me. That is a recipe for disaster in my house, but it will cause me to pause and try to rethink and recalibrate. So yeah, and we try to do as much together as we can. We try to have long conversations sometimes too. Just if we're driving somewhere or we're doing something. And I that's something I loved when we started dating all those years ago. And so whenever we get a chance to do that, he's more of like, let's go salsa dancing. No, let's go scuba diving. No, let's go hike this mountain. No, let's go do this. And I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe we could just talk. How do you feel about that? But we try to find a mix of things that make the other person happy. It's not generally the same thing, but I think it means even more when you go out of your way to do something that you don't love. I don't know. It always tends to make my spouse very happy. And I love diving with him because you know what that is? We're together, but we don't actually have to do like
You can't talk that way.
You
I
can't
don't know
hear a
how to
word he
say
says.
bubble. Okay, great. Sounds good. I win that fight. We've had some of our best fights underwater, though, I have to tell you. It's pretty legit arguments.
Awesome. Speaking of fights, can I share a resource that I just learned about this last year?
Yeah.
I have a spouse who loves to solve problems and expected that like in marriage, we'd have a fight about something. That's a problem. We'd solve it, move on. And so as we like circled back around to the same fight over and over and over the years, there's been moments where my spouse has just been like, what is wrong with us? And if you're familiar with John Gottman, who's a pretty famous relationship psychologist and has done tons of studies and has this relationship lab, he and his wife this last year, I guess in 2024, it was published. They published a book called Fight Right. And our therapist mentioned it to us, and I immediately was like, yep, buy this book, read this. Super practical. And I probably just starting out, one of the things he says in the research is that 69% of disagreements are unresolvable for couples. 69%. So basically like 70% of the things that we disagree about, we're never going to resolve. And so the goal is to learn to fight right, because these things are going to come up over and over and over again. And of course, they have like these different ways of addressing that. But very early on, just reading, he said like there's 3 phases to arguments and fights. And one is setting the agenda, 2 is persuasion, 3 is compromise. And he said most couples just spend all their time in persuasion. And I was like, oh yeah, that's totally. And
Bait
half
it
the
until I'm
time
right.
we're like, I don't even know what we're fighting about after, so long. You're like, wait, what is this even about? And so very early on, I just started when John and I started getting into something and he jumps into persuasion. I would just be like, hold on one second. Before you continue, can we just like back up and like I want to really understand, what are we talking about? Like, so I would like force this, like, what's the agenda? And it was actually quite a funny tactic to just kind of like get us out of our pattern of jumping into persuasion. And there's a bunch of other things in the book that we found incredibly practical and helpful. So that's been a very tangible, practical resource that's helped us quite a bit.
Thank you for that. One of Lisa's super skills is to find the best books to recommend. So we will note that in the show notes. This has been, I mean, the point of this conversation wasn't to like solve marital problems in the Foreign Service, because that is like the elephant in the corner that everybody has in every room in their relationship, right? It was
And
more
maybe
just to,
maybe in Foreign Service families, the percentage is even higher than 70% unresolvable.
probably. What I last thoughts on relationships, keeping relationships strong, and maybe highlighting that maybe staying undivorced isn't the right path. Maybe the path is that your 70% of unresolvable conflict is just too much, and then that's a different path, but that's a different conversation. But what do you guys have as last thoughts on what is this concept about staying undivorced, staying together, keeping your relationship strong in a Foreign Service lifestyle? I would say that more so than in quote unquote normal setting stateside, where you live in the same community, you know the same people, your kids go to school from pre-K through grade 12 at the same school with the same kids. Like there's a lot more village and community, and we kind of hop from one to the next to the next to the next. So I feel like there's a lot of priority put onto an emphasis put onto your marital relationship. And I think unfortunately then tiny little snarls tend to like blow into like these huge bombs that maybe become unresolvable. But using skills like fighting well, or communicating, or investing into the relationship is really important, because this marital relationship is so important. What do you guys think? Last thoughts? I've left you all stunned.
I'm actually just trying to figure out what I think the rate of divorce is in the Foreign Service. I've heard high, but I also haven't ever witnessed it firsthand. I haven't seen a couple break up. And I also feel like part of this stressful environment that we're in is also a shared bonding experience at the end. If you can get through those first 6 tumultuous months and you can find your community, which is sometimes even more intense than a place like in the States, where you may or may not actually forge a community with people in their individual homes. We're almost forced to, whether we like it or not. And it is there, whether we like it or not. And so the relationships can just also, I think, be much more intense, because you know you only have these people in your lives for a certain amount of time. And I just look at like the 4 of us, and you 2 have already left and are on other sides of the world, and we're still chatting, right? And I don't know how many cumulative hours we spent together when we were all here in Sri Lanka, but it also just forges these more intense bonds, I think. And that has been my experience. And I do think that couples that can stay together through it and find their methodology that works for them, there is a bright side to that, or a resilience, to quote Morgan, that comes from that maybe does strengthen relationships comparatively to those who haven't been challenged in the same ways and haven't had to fight those struggles together in countries where they don't speak the languages and are covered in colleges.
I think on that same thing, right? I was just reading somebody saying like, oh, if you can, stick with your marriage, like I was talking to my grandma who's been married 50 years or something, and how like eventually you'll love them even more. That I think in that consistent environment, right? Like it's exactly what you're saying, Hillary. You don't have these highs and lows as often. So it's almost like we in this lifestyle, you're in these constant cycles of like, I love this person, I hate this person, I love this person, I hate this person, and like maybe not always so extreme, right? But that you're presented with that constantly. And so you are pretty quickly able to see that like that cycle usually comes back up. Whereas I think if you had had this really delightful, like white picket fence, suburban lifestyle in America and some challenge happened, you would be like, oh my gosh, this isn't the person I thought I knew, and it's over. Whereas we're just like, oh, okay, like this is another high, this is another low. And that I guess could be a benefit to the lifestyle is that you have all of that on a really compressed frequent scale, but are able to see, like you're saying, that rather than it shaking you, it's like unpleasant. It doesn't make it fun to do those lows, but like you recognize that there will be highs and that it's worth it because over the long haul you will both be better for it. And probably there's nobody else who would ever understand that more than that partner that you went through all that with. Lisa's
That's what I
nodding.
said. That's what I. That's
Yeah,
what I
It
said.
did. It's
You just
exactly
said it
what you
more
said. I just
eloquently.
said it again, which is like a man, because we don't have a man here. I had to repeat what you said
Oh.
and try to claim it as my own.
I appreciate it.
So that was Morgan again, everybody. I said
I love it. And it's our shared stories, right? That's sometimes John and I are like, oh wow, we have quite an incredible story. And it would be a major loss if we decided to go our different ways. And like it's just one of the factors that come into place. And building off of, kind of what Hillary and Morgan you both said, the fact that we do start over repeatedly, we meet new people, it's a cool opportunity to tell our story. And I'd encourage everybody listening to, like, when you meet new people, when you meet new couples, ask them their story. How'd you first meet? What was your story of getting together, and et cetera, et cetera? Because there's something that is really good for me to remind myself of the story of me and John and all of the wonderful parts of it. And yeah, the difficult parts too. And wow, look, look what we have been through. Look what we have figured out along the way, and be proud of that.
I think we need Princess Bride one more time just to wrap up.
Woo love.
nice. Wov. Woo
It's
wov.
all about
Woo
woo
love.
love.
Thank you so much, all of you for all three of you for your thoughts and this conversation. This was great. Thank you all for listening. It was really nice to share this with you, and I hope you join us again the next time we have 4 women talking. Have a great day.
Bye.